Tell me what you think is most interesting, most surprising, most powerful about singing for the brain.
The singing brain actually is the thing that is, you can call it the operating system of human consciousness. In my experience as a mantra singer, look, I'm an agnostic, okay? Which makes me an odd person in the bhakti world, because people are like, hey, just sing and it'll all be fine. And one level that's true, it is. But I always thought, well, what if I don't believe in this, but I'm still having an experience of it? Like, how does that work? And as I started to investigate it and started to watch first what was happening to me, the first act in a kirtan, when you're doing a call and response chant, whether it's in Sanskrit or any language, or when you're doing anything where people are singing back and forth, is that you start to regulate your breathing. And just that act is relaxing. So we have an autonomic nervous system, and it has two parts. There's the parasympathetic, which is the relaxation mode, and the sympathetic, which is also known as like the fight or flight or excitement mode. Typically, the brain interpolates between one mode and the other. You get super excited, then you got to chill out, things are boring, and then you need some excitement, and we go back and forth between these modalities. As it turns out, singing causes both of them to fire simultaneously. And here's how this works. As you become established in your breath and it slows down, this stimulates your parasympathetic nervous system, and it causes you to relax. And it begins a flood of neuropeptides, which also increase your ability to relax. And you start to feel a softening of the boundaries of your personhood and a sense of connection to others.
Yeah. I've heard it said that when human beings go into this collective resonance together, the very small part of our brain that tells us we're separate from each other, which is a necessary part of our brain, actually measurably diminishes, right? So this idea of moving together, breathing together, syncing up our emotional state together, and particularly singing together, because it's a full body experience, gives us this empirical sense of oneness it's no longer theoretical. It's actually, you can feel it when you're in the room with it.
You can also see it on a scope, okay? So there's a part of our brain called the occipital, back, parietal, top modes, often in yoga, often called the crown chakra. But one thing that part of the brain does is it establishes our sense of where our body starts and stops. Okay, so there's a boundary between self and world that the brain imposes. But when people sing, and especially when people sing together, there's a softening, or there's less flow into that part of the brain, so less of an insistent signal that says, I'm here and you're there.
Right.
And neurologically speaking, when it reaches full stop, like, you have a sense of having merged with everything around you. So there's an interesting thing here, though, is that neurologically, the state of being an individual and the state of being unbounded ecstasy are both real.
I've felt it. I'm sure you have too.
For sure.
Yes.
But there's a deep, profound question here that is involved in group singing, is like the role of the individual and the collective. And this gets right to like some of our societal problems right now.
Yes. How do we engage in collective care and community care at the same time? And I actually think that part of the distractive, consumptive culture that we're living in now is actually preventing us from remembering this part of ourselves that already knows that. It's like you said, we're hardwired. I always say we're hardwired for expression, not just in isolation, but in community. It's actually who we are. It's who we've been from the beginning of time. And we're in this sort of like modern state of amnesia about how crucial it is to our health.
Absolutely. And the thing is that one of the things that makes us feel happy is a sense of connection and community and connection to one another.
Mm-hmm.
Singing creates a ritual around that,
Mm-hmm.
that whether it's like singing in church or in a kirtan or chanting something at a football game, we're actually lining up our brain waves with one another when we do that.
Yeah.
We're
Yeah.
synchronizing our breathing.
Yeah.
That has an effect on our brain waves. Ultimately, it also creates simultaneously a feeling of excitement. So we start with this feeling of relaxation, but as we start to feel connected, we start to feel excited by that. It
Yeah.
pleases us,
Yeah.
and it
Yeah.
stimulates our sympathetic nervous system. So
Mm-hmm.
both of them start to fire simultaneously, and this is such a great feeling for us. When this starts to happen, we release massive amounts of oxytocin, which
Mm-hmm.
is a bonding
Yeah.
neuropeptide. Like
Yeah.
when a baby is born, a woman's brain is filled with
Yeah.
oxytocin, and
Yeah.
so is the baby's. And so
Yeah.
this bonding occurs. So when we do that, we create bonds with one another.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
they're meaningful bonds, especially if they're tied to ritual or some activity that
Especially if they're tied to ritual. Yeah.
absolutely.
And there's a lot of conversation these days about self-regulation and tools for self-regulation. And we both know, and probably many people on this live also know, that sound and singing allows us, it's one of the greatest tools for self-regulation. If we get, if we tip into the scale of being out of balance emotionally, or if we tip into the scale of being triggered by anything, that one of the greatest tools besides breath, besides grounding, is moving it's actually enhancing the self-regulation resonance response, the actual sound that brings us to balance and brings us to a state of calmness. But there's also this idea of co-regulation, and that we not only need to be self-regulated, but we need to be co-regulated. And
Right.
co-regulation, we don't have a lot of spaces for us to do that anymore.
Right.
And
Our
it's
ideas
tragic.
about regulation are often kind of top down, like authoritarian
Right.
models.
Right.
But co-regulation, like the way when people sing together in a choir, for example, is there's millions of little micro adjustments that people are making to one another.
Yeah.
And that makes the difference, and it's not hierarchically mandated. It's something that individually people are doing, is making
That's
these
right.
adjustments. But the result is a feeling of compassion for one another.
Mhm.
It's a feeling of being united and
Yeah.
connected in common purpose.
Yeah.
And without that, we are surely lost in so many
Hmm.
ways. I mean, there's
Agreed.
negative ways that we can be connected together. I mean, if we're engaged in a war, for example, there's a common enemy, and that tends to unite people together. Although that's kind of being united in a sympathetic or fight or flight response.
Hmm.
It's more powerful to be united also in a relaxation response, where we feel, like connected to one another in a purpose that transcends like mere identity or our need to be safe.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes. Yes. Everybody can sing. Everybody has a voice.
yeah,
I've never met anyone who can't sing. I know people who aren't familiar with their instrument, but that's kind of a different thing, right?
yeah. But that's just a matter of learning. I mean, we're inherently musical, and the
Yes.
thing is that our ability to be musical might even have been an evolutionary adaptation. When you can connect in rhythm, and being like rhythm and the voice are all instruments derive from that. But when
Yeah.
people could sync up in this way, you could engage in common purpose, and that actually provided an evolutionary advantage because you could cooperate on so many other levels and also communicate joy and the stories. And so much of the myth and meaning making process
Yeah.
comes through musical culture.
Yeah.
What we've done now is reduced it to like mere, I guess, entertainment.
Entertainment. I've actually even heard that rhythm was at the heart, or has been at the heart, of mapping out the world, right? So if you lived in a piece of land and you were wanting to measure or see the scope of the land on which you lived, or the
Yeah.
land that you were responsible for stewarding, the way to measure it before, drones and whatnot, right? Maybe even the way they built those massive sculptures that you can only see from outer space was through walking the land in a rhythmic way, with
Ah, yeah.
song, with, every beat is a foot. And so you can measure it that way. You can draw out the picture of it. And I think that's a fascinating thing to think about too, right? Have we mapped the whole world through rhythm and song?
Well, did you
Certainly,
ever read Bruce Chatwin's book, The Song
I
Lines,
did. I
about
did. And I
effort?
think song
Yes.
lines are amazing.
Yeah.
For those of you who don't know what song lines are, it's really like in Aboriginal culture in Australia, when you are born onto a piece of land, this was before they were, horrifyingly ripped from their land.
Yeah.
But if you were born into a piece of land, there was a song that described that piece of land, and was part of a sense of belonging and stewardship in that land, a belonging and a keeping the universe alive, right?
Yeah.
Singing the universe alive.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that in many cultures there's this idea, this causative idea, that some deity or other sang or continues to sing the world into being.
Right.
So why shouldn't we be singing the world into being
We
all the
should. We
time
should be
too?
imagining the world that we want and continuing to sing it into being. One of the tragedies of the pandemic is, of course, we needed to do that more than anything.
I
And
know.
it was the one like most super spreader event that you could imagine. So
I know.
we were stymied in doing the very thing that could have actually helped heal us in
Yeah,
some way.
and it's time to bring it
Right.
back. And
Right.
that's why I'm very happy that you're doing what you're doing, that I'm doing what
Me
I'm
too.
doing, and that there's a way in which we are coming together in the musical community to
Yeah.
try and remember this art of singing together. That's one of the things I
Yeah.
love about kirtan, is that it's not just performers, it's we are all uplifting the song together. We're becoming it.
Right. Our method and our message are essentially united in this, is that
Mm-hmm.
what we're doing is bringing people together
Mm-hmm.
and creating experiences that create greater bonds. Like the message, for example, of kirtans and the call and response of it is that the impulse, the loving, like divine knowledge, within us is amplified by our relationship with one another. Like, in a sense, everybody's at the center of this thing, but all together there's a bigger consciousness that's created, a field of awareness that then can be moved by joy as opposed
Yeah.
to fear. All the drugs that you could possibly take from outside already exist within you, and singing is an awesome way to manifest those things.
uh, I always say singing is my favorite drug. So I love that you said we have all of that within us. Woohoo! All
Woohoo.
right, beautiful humans.
All
Bye
right.
bye. Thank
Bye.
you. Mm-mm, mm-mm, mm-mm.
Oh.